Welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dykens of Weave, and today I am joined by Dr. Cynthia Jackson Hammond. She is the president of the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, and I am so pleased to be joined by you today. Thank you so much.
It is my pleasure to be here with you, Amy. Thank you so very much for having me.
Excellent. And so you were, I don't know if you remember this, but you were our very first guest when we launched the podcast. And it was a lovely conversation. But it's been a little bit of time, and we have grown in our listenership. And so I think it would be worthwhile for you to go ahead and introduce listeners to CHEA, help them understand a little bit of the history and the mission so that we can set the context for our conversation that we're going to have today.
Sure. And we often refer to ourselves as CHEA, which stands for the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, which is a mouthful. So CHEA is much more convenient for people to say. And CHEA was formed after an extensive discussion about the role of the U.S. Department of Education in establishing criteria for institutions around academic quality. This was in response to about 25 institutions across the country, Research One, liberal arts, private, public, HBCUs, minority serving institutions, that all came together and said, we are more than willing to respond to some of the regulations by the Department of Education as it deals with compliance for financial um, contributions, such as Title IV funding. And we will comply, but we believe that the discussion about academic quality should be that of the institutions and not that of the Department of Education. So CHEA was formed out of those kinds of discussion and as a result of a referendum. Uh, CHEA serves as an advocacy nonprofit organization for institutions. Institutions are our members. And we do that by providing recognition for accrediting organizations. And we have over 68 accrediting organizations that we recognize. And we recognize them. And by the way, the word recognize is almost synonymous with accredit. So we accredit the accreditors. And those are institutions as well as programs that reside within the institution. And we verify that the accreditor is able to go into the institution and to work with institutions to ensure that academic quality and academic integrity is maintained. Whereas the Department of Education works primarily with verification of institutions' ability to monitor and manage financial resources. That's provided by the federal government.
Very interesting. Can you say a little bit more about that? So, because I've heard, from others as we've had these discussions about the Department of Education and recognition, right? And that certainly is something that's in folks, kind of repertoire when they're talking about accreditation and accreditors. And so when you're talking about CHEA as somebody who recognizes accreditors, talk a little bit about like the differences there and what would be the value of the DOE versus CHEA for us.
And it's not one or the other. In many instances, some institutions are not eligible for federal funding. Uh, in some instances, institutions are eligible for funding, but they also want the gold seal standard of approval that their institution not only can manage financial funds from the federal government, but their institution is academically viable and has a high level of quality. It's one thing for an institution to receive money to stay afloat, but it's also more equally important for the institution to be able to say that our programs and our institutions are of high quality. And that quality is ascertained by the process known as accreditation. So we protect the accreditation, we protect and advocate for the institutions to do their own kind of self evaluation, self study about what is working and what is not working, and how do we move the bar so that every student experience a great deal of success during their collegiate experience.
Excellent. So it sounds like CHEA focus is very much around students and student outcomes versus the Department of
Mhm.
Ed that the Department of Education that is more focused potentially on fiscal responsibility, integrity around an organization being viable, things like that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
And it's not, and I want to go back to, again, to say it's not an either or. I think both the CHEA organization as well as the Department of Education serves a function, serves a purpose, and the ability for an institution to say when a student comes to this institution, they are going to be successful for a career or a professional school is the academic piece of that. To say that an institution is providing financial support through financial aid, Title IV funding to support that journey is the Department of Education purpose. Um, when I talk about academic quality, institutional autonomy, academic freedom, those are values that are within the CHEA organization. It is our firm belief, just as it was in 1996, that the academic community has the ability to set those benchmarks and standards of excellence. And every institution wants to be able to say that their students are successful, that families that send their kids to those institutions have been fully made comfortable by the activities and the experiences that those students have. And that's the CHEA part: academic integrity, academic quality, student success, um, allowing an opportunity for the institution to look inward to say, okay, well, what could we do better? How are we keeping up with changing dynamics so that our students who graduate can have a successful
Mm,
career, professional career?
yeah. Yeah, excellent. I like something you said there about autonomy, right? In today's environment, higher education is experiencing a what feels like a milestone moment in our history around autonomy and protecting the importance of, as you said, things like academic freedom and the ability to serve your unique student populations in the ways that your particular institutional culture supports for your particular student populations. Like, there's a lot of value that I can see the perspective of the CHEA academic approach, what is happening from an academic really perspective at this institution through accreditation. Like, you're protecting that really what is a hallmark of education and higher education in North America. That there are so many diverse universities, colleges, institutions that are serving students in higher ed, right? And not turning that into something that is a stamped cookie cutter kind of thing seems incredibly important. You referenced maybe can you share a little bit about history around CHEA again? We talked about this lightly, but you were referencing in 1996 and things. Can you talk a little bit about what was happening then and how it might relate to some of the things that we're seeing today?
And I think it's important to go back to remember that uh, that unlike many other countries, the United States does not have a unified ministry of education. that
Mm.
dictates to, I shouldn't say dictate, mandates what an institution can and cannot do.
Mhm.
And because of the diversity of populations that are served by institutions, it's important that institutional autonomy remains clear because not all institutions are the same. Uh, they are very mission driven.
Mhm.
Some are research based, some are uh, surrounded around workforce development, some are about progressing the communities that these students come from. So the institutional autonomy is very, very important. Uh, Before CHEA, there was an organization called COPA, and
Mm.
COPA was doing some of that advocacy, but then it dissolved.
Mm.
And when COPA dissolved, then CHEA replaced it. And so the expansion of CHEA went to not only advocacy, but to ensure that the accreditors that go into these schools to work with institutions and to provide standards are in a good place to do that kind of work.
Mm. Excellent. That's really helpful. It feels like something that you're describing is around thinking about the quality of the experience that students are having, even though it may be mission driven in very different directions, can still be held to a standard of quality and expectation. And it also, as you said, there could have been this like very unfortunate gap in higher education being represented, having a voice in what's happening, not only there in DC where you're located, but across the nation in conversations about the importance of maintaining that diversity of institutional missions and the students that have access. It feels like CHEA is playing a really important role in those conversations representing higher education.
Our members are institutions, universities, but we also are very committed to the accreditors that we recognize because they have a really um, monumental task, and they hold institutions accountable to a very high standard. Their standards are around academic integrity of the institutions. Uh, there was a period in time, and there's still, just as recently in the last 10 years, you would see uh, fake institutions that would prey on the naivety of, of the public. And uh, accrediting organizations hold institutions to a standard. So if an institution is recognized by an accreditor, that says a lot about the institution. It says that there's a high level of accountability, and accrediting organizations hold those institutions to that level of accountability. CHEA holds the accreditor accountable to a high level of accountability so that that is a circle of connectedness, but also a circle that everybody has a responsibility to make sure that institutions are of the highest quality for the American public.
Excellent. And so, can you say a little bit too about the fact that it's not just institutions that are accredited? Can you talk a little bit about programmatic accreditation as well?
Sure, sure. And the programs within the institutions, whether or not they're education, allied health, architectural science, all of those programs must meet, not must, but choose to meet a standard or a set of standards provided by a program accreditor. We at CHEA provide the accreditors that level of oversight, if you want to call it oversight. But we say, okay, if you want to be a CHEA program accreditor, you must meet these standards. And then the program accreditors go into the institutions that says if you want to be considered of high quality, you must meet these standards. So the whole idea of standards is important not only just for the institution, but also for the program that's being served. And right now, uh, AI is throwing another uh, 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 eye-opening consideration for program accreditors, about the authenticity of the work that the students are doing, and how does that filter into teaching and learning. So program accreditors and institutional accreditors have a big job, and they are doing it quite well.
Excellent. They're thinking about these things really hard every day, and what is the
Yeah.
impact on society. But I also know that it is important that CHEA is thinking very hard every day about the quality of the accreditors that they work with. My understanding is
Absolutely.
becoming a CHEA recognized accreditor is not necessarily an easy task.
No,
I
I don't think it's supposed to be easy.
think you're
It,
right.
it,
I think you're right.
oh,
Yeah. But it's
uh,
worth it. Rarely is something that's worth it
yes.
easy. But I have, in my conversations with accreditors who have been recognized, um, heard them talk about the value that they have received as well. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just about the students, which of course we're all very focused on, but the accreditor organizations seem to also be benefiting from the kind of stop and reflect and do some of that
Mhm.
self-study, and see, how are we measuring up to the benchmarks that our peers are setting around
Yeah.
accreditation as well, and that's valuable.
I think, and thank you for mentioning that. I think that any accrediting organization that wants to go into an institution and hold them to a certain level of of outcomes and expectancies of standards should have that same expectations for themselves. And CHEA has 24 standards that we ask accrediting organizations to not only give us a narrative, but give us evidence that those standards are being met. And that's important. When you stop, just in general, Amy, when you stop looking at yourself for a level of accountability and you're only looking at others, then you are not really part of that growing dynamic of self improvement. So the expectation is aspirational. The expectation is that we always want institutions and programs to always not say, I have arrived, but I have arrived at this point. What else can I do to be better? And that's what we sort of hold for accrediting organizations. You've met these standards, but what could you do to be better? So we challenge them through a rigorous process, but it's a self-study process for them as well to look at aspects that perhaps that they had not looked at before. So we are very, very pleased with the process. It is an ambitious process, but those who manage to provide the evidence needed to meet those standards are better organizations because of it. And I would dare say that there are some accrediting organizations that are not CHEA recognized. And maybe their self assessment might be different from CHEA's. But I can say that those who meet the CHEA uh, standards are very, very comfortable that the work that they are doing is meaningful.
Excellent. I love that. And it feels important then, as somebody who is leading at an institution or in a program, when I'm considering, what is it that we're going to pursue? What are our accreditation strategies for our programs and our student outcomes, that we consider, what accreditor, there are some choices, what accreditors are
Mhm.
CHEA recognized and which ones
Yeah,
have taken the time to kind of walk the walk and not just talk the talk.
yeah,
And that's
yeah.
excellent. Uh,
And I think institutions appreciate it when an accrediting organization has gone through a similar process
yeah.
of
Yeah.
self assessment.
Hmm.
It's not do as I say, but walk with me because I've gone through this as
Yeah,
well.
excellent. I love that. It feels like it's adding tremendous value to the ecosystem that we call accreditation and
Mhm.
higher education quality assurance, honestly.
Absolutely.
So, unfortunately, that ecosystem has been under attack recently. I would very much
Yeah.
like to hear from you. Not so much. I mean, I think we're our listeners, and we are all very aware of, some of the dialogues that we're hearing outside of our space around accreditation and the value of quality assurance processes. But I'd like to hear from you some. What is it that we can do? What should we be really paying attention to assist with this conversation, so that you're not up there on the hill trying to do this on your own?
Mhm. I think that from a very surface level, institutions and their boards of governance, whether or not it's boards of trustees or boards of governance, wherever that dynamic might be at the institution, need to have consistent conversations around the quality assurance piece, around academic freedom and institutional autonomy. Um, those are not shadow words. Those are words that really mean something when it comes to an institution having the ability to make the decisions about academic integrity rather than being told what it is. The academy has the ability, has the experience, and has the expertise to have those kinds of conversations to make those decisions. So you ask what could be done or what could add to the conversation is for institutions, administration, faculty, staff, boards to really have a voice and to use that voice about academic freedom and what does it mean and why it is important. To have the voice about what is important around institutional autonomy and not acquiesce to some political group that seeks to diminish the quality of higher ed by making decisions for higher ed.
Excellent. I think it's incredibly important, as you said, that we find our voice. And it seems that sometimes we are not as vocal in our kind of conversations around the positive outcomes that we see. I personally, coming from campus, know without any doubt in my mind that we transform students' lives every day in higher education. Right? But we don't necessarily do a good job of communicating about that very publicly, and that the process of accreditation and quality assurance in higher education can become a really valuable vehicle, not only for improvement, but also to give us voice to these wonderful stories, right? This is about us stopping and saying, what is the wonderful work that we're doing, and how do we know that this is really quality?
Yeah. And not only telling the story, but having the data and the evidences available so that the public can see we did this because of our own desire to be better, not because someone mandated that it had to be done in that particular way. And I think that that's very, very powerful. That has always been historically the academy's role, and to diminish that role uh, puts us in a position where we have no voice, that we can't make any decisions, and that we rely on the federal government or even state government to dictate what is in the best interest of students and families and communities. And when that happens, then we cease to serve our constituencies fairly and with an interest for the future.
An interest for the future. That is a really nice way to think about that, because really that's what education is about. You're investing in
Yeah.
the future, right? Very nice. So, thinking about the future of higher education accreditation, thinking about where we're headed for institutional as well as programmatic accreditation, can you talk a little bit more about the activities that CHEA is working to facilitate around that?
Mhm. Mhm. Right now we are really engaged with informational kind of forum of sharing with especially persons what we call on the hill who tend to roll out perhaps every 4 years, sometimes every 8 years, but it's an educational process. So we are consistently advocating for institutional autonomy and for the purpose of accreditation to those who are not so familiar with higher education. So information is very, very important. Secondly, we are looking at opportunities to work with institutions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does that mean? Not because we tell you what it means, but begin to have those dialogues on your campus, whether or not you are a majority institution or a minority. Define it for your campus. And how does that work? How does that serve your institution? How does that progress uh, uh, student to degree? How does it support faculty and staff? So having those kinds of conversations that I think for traditionally we just sort of took it for granted that institutions were doing the certain things. We're asking them to be more intentional about understanding of DEI, and that is not a direct role of a CHEA, but we get a lot of calls from institutions asking for assistance in that regard. And of course, because we are a member institution, we try to offer that guidance.
Excellent. I know that you have also been working quite a bit on providing a space for innovation and creativity in higher education. Can you share some about that work and how CHEA can facilitate some of those like spaces for really having innovation and creativity happening in higher education?
And the manifestation of innovation is one of our standards that we ask the accrediting organization to support innovation. Now, we don't tell you what innovation is, but we do have a generic definition that innovation is anything that's new that is going to support student success. So it may not be new it may not be new at a research institution, but if a smaller institution decides to use some of those same innovative ideas, it's new for them. So innovation is gives a spark to creativity, to what could we do differently. Might require a little risk, but is it a risk worth taking if it means that students are going to be successful in the classroom and outside the classroom? So when we have our conferences, we have a lot of presentations around innovation, not only what's happening in the United States, but abroad. So that's an opportunity for our global partners to share and to learn what innovation looks like on a college campus.
Excellent. And so I think that some folks may be surprised to learn that there is even a standard for accreditors that has been focused on innovation and encouraging innovation. That is something that feels very important as we're talking about. I mean, think about students. We want to create safe learning spaces for them, right? Organizations also need safe learning spaces for folks, like you said, to try things that are new
To
and
try.
to really stretch themselves and to try something that maybe, as you said, they learned from a colleague that's international in some cases or across town, right? In some cases, but it's all about doing something that is going to serve students in ways that are more productive and improve their outcomes.
I think that there has been some misnomer that higher education is stagnant, that everything is done the same way for the last 200 years. But I think the technology innovations have really moved higher education to a new level of change. And change is something that has had to happen since the COVID pandemic. People changed immediately to facilitate quality teaching and learning. And so that spirit of change has invoked a new interest in what could be done differently. We have a different population of students than what we had in the 90s. You know, students are coming to institutions with new ideas, new ways of learning, and faculty and staff are finding ways to adapt and to create new learning environments so that the energy and the synergy of learning is continuing, but it's also very exciting.
Excellent. And that has always been something that I appreciate, not only about your leadership, but also about the CHEA organization. When we attend your conference, there is energy, there is excitement. People are thinking really hard about what can we do in the future. As I go back to campus, as I think about what's next strategically for my institution, what are those takeaways that can continue that energy and really push things to do something new and supportive of student populations that are different than student
Yeah,
populations than we have ever seen ever before on a campus. It's
yeah.
wonderful.
Different is a good
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
It's a good thing. And the energy from our conferences, there was a time that our focus was purely accreditation, and it
Mm,
still is. But there are so many other factors that go into a self study,
mm,
and self study is done for the purpose of continuous
yeah.
improvement. It's not done just for, okay, we've done this self study, let's put this on the shelf for another 7 years. It's a means of sparking new energy
Hmm.
about how I teach, how students learn, how the outcomes are meaningful for students,
Hmm.
how to get students from point A to point B to point C to graduation, and to take that energy and synergy into their communities to be change agents.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Our listeners are very much engaged in this work on campus all day, every day, right? They are doing the hard work that you and I used to do on campus, and now we're
Yeah,
supporting them out there, but also the accreditor organizations. You and I both know very clearly the hard work that they're doing to protect students, to improve outcomes, and really to make higher education in North America something that we're all very proud of. So,
absolutely. And I have to commend you and we for actually getting in there, getting your hands into the soil and creating technology and management systems that make it easier for data to be collected and to be mined and to be examined for the purpose of student success. So I'm glad that Weave is a part of this big set of dynamic organizations to make things happen for students. So thank you so very much.
thank you, Cynthia. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely.